Mail carrier startled, calls police upon seeing box moving in his van. Richard Johnson parked his U.S. Postal Service van in the shade of a tree on Broadway Avenue and took a deep breath, checking his wristwatch. He still had 23 deliveries, left to finish his daily route in the Brookline neighborhood of New York City, and the intense heat of that February afternoon made everything harder. That's when he heard a strange noise coming from the back of the vehicle. He turned slowly and widened his eyes as he noticed one of the larger boxes subtly shifting among the other packages. His heart immediately raced. In 15 years, as a mail carrier, he had never seen anything like it. With trembling hands, Richard grabbed his phone and dialed the police. "Emergency. What's your name and address?" A woman's voice answered on the other end. "My name is Richard Johnson. I'm a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier. I'm on Broadway Avenue near number 1457, across from Sullivan's Bakery," he replied, not taking his eyes off the box, which continued to move. "There's a box moving inside my van. It could be something dangerous, I don't know. I need help right away." "Stay calm, sir. A patrol car will be sent to your location in a few minutes. Please don't approach the box and remain outside." "The vehicle. Wait for the officers to arrive," the operator instructed. Richard hung up and took a few more steps back from the van. Sweat dripped down his forehead, dampening the collar of his light blue uniform shirt. All sorts of possibilities ran through his mind. Could it be a bomb, a dangerous animal, or something even worse? As he waited, he noticed a small piece of paper sticking out from one of the openings in the box. Curious, he cautiously approached and saw what looked like a handwritten note. Very carefully, using a pen from his pocket, he pulled the paper out. "Please help, I have no one else left in the world. This is my last hope. My sister Margaret lives at this address, and she's the only one who can take care of him. I couldn't afford proper transportation, forgive me. Signed, Eleanor Williams." Richard frowned, confused. The box moved again, and now he could hear a muffled sound coming from inside. It didn't sound like a bomb or anything threatening for that matter. It sounded more like a bark. His eyes widened in disbelief. Was there a dog in that box? Who would do something like this? 2 weeks earlier, Richard had received his first disciplinary memo in his entire exemplary career. His supervisor, Frank Thompson, had called him into the office and, with a stern expression, informed him that the van's GPS had recorded unauthorized stops on his route. "Punctuality is our motto, Johnson. One more deviation, and we'll have to take stricter measures," Frank warned. The truth was, Richard needed frequent breaks to take his blood pressure medication, a condition he hid from the company for fear of being transferred to administrative duties. At 47, divorced, and with a daughter in college to support, he couldn't afford to lose the overtime benefits that came with being a mail carrier. He thought about the police sirens that would soon arrive, the commotion this would cause, the reports he'd have to fill out, the lost time, and the possible termination. Fear began giving way to anger. Why would someone do this to him? Why his van? Why now, when his life was already complicated enough? But then he heard another bark, weaker this time, almost a whimper. Something inside him stirred. He remembered Buddy, the tan mixed-breed dog that had been his companion throughout his childhood on the outskirts of New York City. He remembered how that simple animal had been his only true company during the hard years after his father left. He looked around. No patrol car in sight yet. He made a quick decision. He stepped closer to the box and carefully opened one of the flaps. 2 frightened little eyes stared back at him, a puppy no more than a few months old, trembling with fear. It was clearly dehydrated and terrified. "Oh my God," whispered Richard, feeling a lump in his throat. His phone rang in his pocket. It was the U.S. Postal Service dispatch center. "Richard, the system shows you've been stopped for over 20 minutes at the same location. Is there a problem with the deliveries?" asked the unmistakable voice of Susan, the operations coordinator. "Had a little setback," he said, looking at the puppy now trying to stand up in the box. "Just needed a quick break. I'm getting back en route now." "Remember what we discussed last week, Richard. Your record is being monitored directly by Supervisor Frank," she warned before hanging up. In the distance, Richard heard police sirens approaching. He had seconds to decide what to do. 3 hours later, sitting in a veterinary clinic in Queens, Richard watched as Dr. Jennifer Collins examined the puppy. It was a poodle mix with some other breed, white fur with brown spots, probably weighing no more than 2 pounds. "He's dehydrated and a little malnourished, but he'll be okay," explained the vet, a woman around 40 with brown hair tied in a messy bun. "You're lucky you found him in time. A few more hours in that box and the story could have been different." Richard's decision had been impulsive. Hearing the sirens, he closed the van and drove away, stopping only when he found this clinic he'd noticed on his routes. He asked Dr. Jennifer to treat the dog as an emergency, vaguely explaining he'd found it abandoned during his route. What he didn't mention was that he'd turned off the van's GPS, violated US Postal Service protocol, abandoned his assigned route, and technically stolen a package. All for a dog that wasn't even his. "What are you going to do with him?" asked the vet as she administered fluids to the puppy. "I don't know," admitted Richard, running a hand through the graying hair at his temples. "The package has a delivery address. It's for someone named Margaret. The sender is a woman named Eleanor Williams." "You're going to deliver the dog like it's a normal package?" Jennifer asked, raising her eyebrows in disapproval. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. "I don't know what to do," Richard confessed, "but I need to find this Margaret. The note said she's the only one who can take care of him." "Shipping animals through the mail is illegal, you know," Jennifer remarked, adding medication to the IV. "You could get in serious trouble for being involved in this." "I know, but—" He hesitated, looking at the puppy now sleeping, hooked up to the IV. "I couldn't just leave him there, you know. Whoever did this must have been desperate. The note said there was no one else in the world." Jennifer studied him more closely. It wasn't every day you saw a middle-aged man, especially one as tough-looking as this broad-shouldered, calloused mailman, showing so much concern for an abandoned animal. "I'll keep the puppy here overnight for observation," she said, her expression softening. "You can come back tomorrow and we'll figure out what to do. He needs fluids and some basic care before going anywhere." Richard nodded, relieved to have time to think. He checked his watch and felt a tightness in his chest. It was almost 5 in the afternoon, and he still hadn't finished his route. His phone showed 7 missed calls from the US Postal Service dispatch center. "I have to go," he said, standing up. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing for now," Jennifer replied. "Consider this part of our abandoned animal rescue program. Just promise you won't simply hand this puppy over in a box to someone you don't even know." Richard promised with a nod and hurried out. When he got into the van, he turned on the GPS again and saw urgent messages on the communicator radio. He took a deep breath before responding. "Dispatch, this is Richard. Sorry for the delay, I had a personal issue." "Richard, are you aware you abandoned your route for over 3 hours?" Susan's voice sounded furious. "Supervisor Frank is waiting for you at the central office. Return immediately." "What about the remaining deliveries?" he asked. "Another employee has taken over your route. Get back to the office now," Susan ordered, before hanging up. As he drove back to the central US Postal Service office, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the puppy and the note. Who was this Eleanor Williams? And why was she so desperate that she'd send a live animal through the mail? The recipient's address, Margaret, was in an upper-middle-class area of New York City, the Upper East Side. There was something about this story that didn't add up. Even more concerning was the reception awaiting him at the office. In 15 years of impeccable service, he had never been called in for a disciplinary meeting. His career was at risk, all because of an impulsive decision to help an abandoned animal. When he parked at the central office, Richard saw Frank Thompson waiting at the entrance, arms crossed and expression stern. Tall, lean, always in an impeccable suit despite the heat, Frank was known for his strictness and zero tolerance for protocol violations. "Johnson, my office now," Frank said bluntly, turning his back and walking into the building. Richard followed silently, aware of his co-workers' curious stares. Everyone knew he was considered the model mail carrier of the office, with records for punctuality and efficiency. Seeing him called in like this sparked whispers all around. In Frank's austere office, walls lined with productivity charts and certificates, Richard remained standing while the supervisor sat. 15 years of service, Johnson. 15 years without a single mark on your record, Frank began, flipping through a folder of documents. And in the last 2 weeks, 3 route deviations, culminating in completely abandoning your work today. I want an explanation. Richard thought about lying, inventing some family emergency or health issue. It would be easier. But something inside him refused to do that. He was tired of hiding his condition, tired of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I have high blood pressure, he admitted finally. I need to take breaks for medication and rest when symptoms worsen. I never said anything because I was afraid of being transferred to desk duty. Frank studied him with an impassive expression. And today, 3 hours isn't a medication break, Johnson. Richard hesitated. Mentioning the dog would mean admitting he violated serious USPS protocols and possibly federal mail laws. It could lead not just to termination, but legal trouble. I had a personal emergency I couldn't avoid, he replied vaguely. That's not enough, Frank countered, leaning forward. We're talking about dereliction of duty, undelivered mail, unhappy customers, an entire system compromised by your actions. Richard swallowed hard. He knew he was in an indefensible position. I'll be straight with you, Johnson, Frank continued, closing the folder. If this were any other employee, termination would be immediate. But given your record, I'm willing to give one last chance. Transfer to an administrative role, no public interaction, no overtime, 6-month probation. That or termination. Your choice. Richard's world collapsed. An administrative role meant a significant pay cut, right when his daughter Emily was starting her 2nd year at NYU Medical School. Even with 2 jobs, working weekends as a waiter at a restaurant in Little Italy, it was already hard to keep up with the bills. Without the overtime from deliveries, it would be impossible. I need that overtime, Frank, said Richard, his throat dry. My daughter's in college. You should have thought of that before neglecting your responsibilities, Frank cut in. The decision's final. Starting tomorrow, you report to the admin department. Pamela will brief you on your new duties. Richard left the room feeling defeated. 15 years of dedication, waking up at 4 in the morning, braving sun and rain, aggressive dogs, the chaotic traffic of New York City, all thrown away in a single day. Because of an abandoned puppy in a box. But despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The scared look in that puppy's eyes had touched him deeply. It was as if, somehow, life was giving him a chance to do something meaningful, after so many years of just delivering letters and packages without getting involved. That night, in his small apartment in Astoria, Richard couldn't sleep. Worries about finances mixed with images of the puppy at the vet clinic and curiosity about who Eleanor and Margaret were. He decided that before starting his new admin job, he needed to resolve this situation. The next morning he called the clinic as soon as he woke up. Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic, good morning, answered a young voice. Good morning, this is Richard Johnson. I'd like to speak with Dr. Jennifer about the puppy I brought in yesterday afternoon. One moment, I'll transfer you. A few seconds later, Jennifer's voice came on the line. Richard, I was hoping you'd call. The puppy's doing much better today, eating normally and much more alert. That's good, he sighed in relief. Can I come by now to see him? Of course, I'll be here until noon. An hour later, Richard walked into the vet clinic. He was dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, a stark contrast to the US Postal Service uniform he'd worn for so many years. It felt strange, like part of his identity was missing. Jennifer led him to a room where several rescued animals were kept in spacious cages. The puppy was in one of them, far more active than the day before, playing with a small rubber toy. He's a fighter, Jennifer remarked, opening the cage and picking up the puppy. Recovered really fast. I think he's a Poodle Lhasa Apso mix. Probably stay small as an adult. Richard stroked the puppy's head, and it licked his hand in response. His chest tightened at the thought of what might have happened if he hadn't opened that box. I brought the recipient's address, he said, pulling a paper from his pocket. It's in the Upper East Side. Someone named Margaret Williams. The sender's name is Eleanor Williams. Must be her sister. Jennifer took the paper and frowned. You're still thinking of delivering the puppy to this person? What if she knows nothing about it? Or worse, what if she's involved in this illegal transport? I won't just hand him over and leave, Richard explained. I want to understand this story. Why would someone mail a puppy? Who is this Eleanor who claims to have no one else in the world? And if it's dangerous, you don't even know these people. I have to do this, he insisted. I can't explain it, but I feel like I need to see this through. Jennifer studied him for a moment as if weighing his determination. All right, she finally relented. But you're not going alone. I'm coming with you. What? Richard blinked, surprised. You barely know me. Why would you get involved? Because I also want to know who'd do something like this to an animal. And because if this Margaret turns out to be a decent person who can truly care for him, I need to assess whether the home is suitable for a puppy. It's part of my adoption protocol. Richard hesitated. He hadn't planned on having company, but the idea of a veterinarian evaluating the situation made sense. Besides, there was something about Jennifer that inspired confidence, a determination he admired. Okay, let's go together then. Can I pick you up after lunch? Perfect. I'll have one of the nurses cover my appointments. As he left the clinic, Richard realized that, for the first time in many years, he was doing something completely outside his organized routine. Something unpredictable, potentially risky, yet somehow more meaningful than all the deliveries he'd ever made in his life. Little did he know this would only be the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. The house in the Upper East Side was exactly as Richard had imagined, a two-story mansion with a well-kept garden, high walls, and a security system. The kind of place where he'd never delivered mail personally, since it was usually the doorman who handled packages. Are you sure this is the right place? Jennifer asked, holding the carrier where the puppy slept peacefully after taking his prescribed medication. It's the address on the tag, Richard confirmed, parking his Honda Civic 2010 in front of the imposing gate. They approached the intercom, and Richard pressed the button, feeling as nervous as a teenager. After a few seconds, a man's voice answered. May I help you? Good afternoon, my name is Richard Johnson. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Margaret Williams, please. There was a brief silence. Mrs. Margaret no longer lives here, the voice replied. This house is for sale. Richard and Jennifer exchanged worried glances. It's very important that I speak with her. I have a package from her sister, Mrs. Eleanor. Another pause, then, 1 moment. Minutes later, the gate partially opened, and a man around 50, dressed in an impeccable suit, appeared. He had a serious expression and formal posture. Good. Afternoon, I'm William Parker, the realtor handling the sale of this property. How can I assist you? Richard briefly explained that he was looking for Margaret Williams to deliver something sent by her sister, Eleanor. He left out details about the puppy and how he'd found the package. The realtor sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I'm sorry to inform you, but Mrs. Margaret passed away about 3 months ago. I was her lawyer, and now I'm overseeing the sale of the property as stipulated in her will. The news hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He looked at Jennifer, who seemed equally shocked. Passed away, but this package was sent recently. Her sister probably didn't know, William explained. From what I gathered in Mrs. Margaret's documents, they hadn't been in touch for many years. Complicated family relationships, you know how it is. Richard thought of the desperate note. I have no one else left in the world. Eleanor had sent her last hope to someone who wasn't even alive. Do you know where I might find Eleanor Williams? He asked. It's important that I speak with her. William frowned, thoughtful. I'm not certain, but I believe she lives in a small town in New York State. Scranton or Rochester, something like that. Mrs. Margaret mentioned it once when we signed the will documents. Rochester, Jennifer interjected. Are you sure? Not entirely, but I can check Mrs. Margaret's files for any contact information. Why the urgency? Richard and Jennifer exchanged glances, silently deciding how much to reveal. It's a personal matter, Richard said vaguely. Any information about Eleanor's whereabouts would be a huge help. William studied them for a moment, clearly assessing the situation. You're not family, I assume? No, admitted Richard, but we're trying to help Mrs. Eleanor with a delicate matter." The broker seemed hesitant, but something in Richard's sincere gaze seemed to convince him. "Come back tomorrow around 10 a.m. I'll check Mrs. Margaret's files and see if I can find anything to help you." They thanked him and returned to the car. As soon as they got in, the puppy woke up and began whimpering in the carrier. "Now what?" asked Jennifer, picking up the puppy to soothe it. "What are we going to do with him?" Richard watched the animal snuggling into the vet's arms, finally seeming safe after all it had been through. "I don't know," he confessed, "but we need to find this Eleanor. She might truly be desperate. All alone." "In Rochester," murmured Jennifer thoughtfully. "That's almost 200 miles from here." "I know. Are you seriously considering going there?" Jennifer looked at him in surprise. Richard started the car before answering. "I don't know yet, but I can't just ignore this and move on like nothing happened." As they drove back to the city, Richard thought about how his life had completely changed in just 24 hours. He'd lost the job he'd held for 15 years, met a determined veterinarian, found an abandoned puppy, and was now investigating the whereabouts of a desperate woman in upstate New York. "Where do you live?" Jennifer asked, breaking the silence. "Astoria. A small apartment, nothing special. The puppy needs a place to stay tonight," she explained. "The clinic is full with several animals rescued from abuse. Could you take him temporarily?" Richard nearly slammed on the brakes in the middle of the avenue. "Me? I don't know anything about taking care of a dog. Besides, my apartment doesn't allow pets." "It's temporary," Jennifer insisted, "just until we figure things out. I can lend you a bed, food, and the medicine he needs. You saved his life, Richard. It wouldn't be fair to abandon him now." He sighed, defeated. For some reason, he found it hard to say no to this woman he barely knew. "Fine, but only until we sort this out." Jennifer smiled, and Richard realized it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since they'd met. It was a lovely smile, lighting up her usually serious face and turning her brown eyes into something almost magical. "What should we call him?" she asked, stroking the puppy, who was now asleep in her lap again. "Call him?" "The dog. We can't just keep calling him Puppy or Dog forever." Richard hadn't thought of that. Giving a name meant forming a connection, something he'd been trying to avoid. "I don't know, maybe package, since he came by mail," he suggested, attempting humor. Jennifer laughed, shaking her head. "How about Hope? That's what he represented." For Eleanor, wasn't it? Her last hope. Richard glanced briefly at the small sleeping animal. "Hope. So yeah, it suits him." That night in his one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Richard improvised a spot for the newly named Hope. Following Jennifer's instructions, he made a bed out of a cardboard box and some old towels, set out fresh water in a bowl, and portioned the special food she'd given him. The puppy curiously explored the apartment, sniffing every corner, every piece of furniture, as if trying to understand this new environment. Richard watched with a mix of apprehension and fascination. How long had it been since he'd had company? At home? Since Emily had moved out to live closer to college 3 years ago, he'd been alone, stuck in a monotonous routine of work-homework. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was an unknown number. "Hello, Richard, this is William Parker, the broker you met today." "Yes, I remember. Did something happen?" "Actually, yes. After you left, I was intrigued by this story and decided to speed up my research. I found an address for Eleanor Williams in Rochester in Mrs. Margaret's old documents." Richard felt a chill in his stomach. "Can you give it to me?" "Of course, write this down. William provided a full address in Rochester, along with a landline number listed in the records." "Thank you so much, Mr. Parker. You don't know how important this is." "Just one thing, Richard. This address and phone number are over 10 years old. I can't guarantee they're still valid. I understand either way, it's a start." After hanging up, Richard immediately tried the number provided. As expected, a recording informed him the line had been disconnected. He checked the clock. Almost 10 p.m., too late to call Jennifer. Hope approached, resting her little paws on his leg, as if asking to be held. Richard hesitated for a moment before picking her up. The puppy snuggled in, finding a comfortable position, and fell asleep almost instantly. Stroking the animal's soft fur, Richard made a decision. Tomorrow, He would go to Rochester. He needed to find Eleanor Williams and get to the bottom of this story. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The trip to Rochester began at 5 a.m. the next morning. To Richard's surprise, Jennifer insisted on coming along, arguing it was her day off at the clinic and that Hope still needed medical supervision. The real reason, though she wouldn't admit it, was her curiosity about this unusual story and her growing fondness for the former postal worker. In the back seat of the Honda Civic, Hope slept peacefully in her carrier, occasionally waking up to drink water or receive a gentle pet. "I don't even know where to start once we get there," Richard confessed as he drove along Interstate 5. "What if she moved? What if she's not even alive anymore?" "One step at a time," Jennifer replied, gazing out the window at the passing scenery. "We'll go to the address we have, ask the neighbors if needed. In small towns, people usually know each other better." 3 hours later, they were entering Rochester, a mid-sized city in upstate New York known for its universities and strong presence in the sugar alcohol industry. Following the GPS, they headed to the address William had provided, a modest house in a lower middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Richard's heart raced as he parked in front of the given number. The house looked abandoned, with peeling paint, an overgrown yard, and piled-up mail in the mailbox. "Doesn't look like anyone lives here," Jennifer remarked, stepping out of the car. They approached the rusty gate and rang the bell. As expected, there was no answer. Richard glanced around and noticed an elderly woman sweeping the sidewalk next door. "Good morning, ma'am," he greeted, walking over. "Do you happen to know Eleanor Williams, who used to live in this house?" The old woman leaned on her broom and adjusted her glasses to get a better look at them. "Mrs. Eleanor, of course I know her. We've been neighbors for over 30 years, she replied with a distinct small-town accent. "But she doesn't live here anymore." "Do you know where we could find her?" Jennifer asked. The woman hesitated, studying the two strangers with the natural wariness of someone who's lived a long life. "Are you relatives of hers?" "Not exactly," Richard answered, deciding to be honest. "We're trying to deliver something she sent to her sister, but we found out her sister has already passed." The old woman's expression softened. "Mrs. Margaret. Poor Eleanor, she loved her sister so much, even after everything that happened between them." "What happened?" asked Jennifer, curious. "An old family feud," the woman explained, shaking her head. "Something about their parents' inheritance. I don't know the details, but I know they hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Eleanor kept saying that one day the two would reconcile." Richard and Jennifer exchanged meaningful glances. The story was starting to take shape. "Do you know where Eleanor is now?" Richard pressed. The elderly woman sighed deeply before answering. "She's at the Sunrise Senior Living Center, right here in Rochester. She had an incident a few weeks ago. They found her collapsed in the living room, alone for 2 days, before anyone noticed. I even wondered why I hadn't seen her watering the plants, but I thought she was just resting." Guilt was clear in her voice. "Is she all right now?" Jennifer asked, concerned. "She's recovering, from what I heard. The hospital social worker decided she couldn't live alone anymore and sent her to the nursing home. Poor thing, she was always so independent." Richard felt a pang in his chest. The mental image he had of Eleanor was becoming clearer. An elderly woman alone, desperate enough to mail a puppy in hopes that her distant sister might help her, unaware that her sister had already passed. "Can you tell us how to get to the nursing home?" he asked. The woman gave detailed directions, the kind only someone who knew every street and corner of the town they'd lived in their whole life could provide. Before they left, she added, "If you visit her, please tell her Mrs. Robinson sends her regards, and that I'm taking care of her begonias like I promised." Half an hour later, they stood in front of the Sunrise Senior Living Center, a modest but well-kept facility with tidy gardens and a peaceful atmosphere. At the reception, a young attendant greeted them with a professional smile. "We'd like to visit Eleanor Williams," Richard explained. "Are you family?" the attendant asked, checking a ledger. That question again. Richard hesitated, but Jennifer replied naturally, "We're friends. We came from New York City just to see her. The attendant seemed to accept the explanation. Mrs. Williams is in the back garden now, enjoying the morning sun. I can take you there. They followed the young woman through clean hallways decorated with handmade crafts by the residents. The place was simple but welcoming, without the cold, institutional feel Richard had expected. In the garden, several elderly people sat on benches, or in wheelchairs, some chatting in small groups, others just watching or feeding birds. The attendant pointed to a woman sitting alone under a tree. "That's Mrs. Williams. Feel free to approach." Richard's heart raced as they walked over. The woman had her back to them, her completely white hair tied in a simple bun, shoulders slightly hunched, hands resting in her lap. "Mrs. Williams," he called softly. She turned with some difficulty. Her face was lined with age, her eyes, a deep blue, and her expression carried a quiet dignity that contrasted with her apparent fragility. Richard guessed she was around 80. "Yes," she replied, her voice shaky but firm. "My name is Richard Johnson, and this is Jennifer Collins. We'd like to talk to you about—" He hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. "About a puppy you sent to your sister Margaret." Eleanor's eyes widened. A mix of surprise, fear, and hope flashed across her face. How do you know about that?" Richard sat on the bench beside her while Jennifer remained standing. "I was a mail carrier in New York City," he explained, choosing his words carefully. "I found your package in my van. The box was moving." Eleanor covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Oh my God, I didn't mean to harm him. Believe me. I was desperate. I couldn't take care of him here. They don't allow pets. And I thought, Margaret might—" Her voice broke. "Did you find him? Is he okay?" Jennifer intervened gently. "Yes, we found him in time. I'm a veterinarian, and I can assure you he's perfectly fine. He's in the car now, sleeping." Tears began streaming down Eleanor's wrinkled face. "Thank God. I couldn't sleep thinking about him, wondering if he was okay, if he'd make it to Margaret. What I did was very wrong, I know, but I didn't see any other way." "Mrs. Williams," Richard said carefully, "we need to tell you something important. We went to your sister's house yesterday and—" "Margaret doesn't live there anymore," Eleanor interrupted, surprising them. "I found out. After I sent Thunder, I called her. A man answered, said the house was for sale, said Margaret had passed away." Jennifer and Richard exchanged confused glances. "You knew?" Jennifer asked, perplexed. Eleanor wiped her tears with a handkerchief from the pocket of her floral dress. "I found out after I mailed the package. In my desperation, I wasn't thinking straight. I found Thunder abandoned near the supermarket, so small, so scared. I tried keeping him here secretly, but the supervisor found out and gave me an ultimatum." She sighed deeply. "I thought of my sister right away. Even with our differences, I knew she loved animals. I used almost all my savings to send him, wrapped. Him as best I could, put food and water inside. I thought he'd get there in a day." "Why didn't you use an animal transport service?" Richard asked, trying to understand. "You think I didn't try?" Eleanor replied with a touch of bitterness. "It cost nearly $1,000. My pension barely covers my medications. The only option I saw was the U.S. Postal Service." She lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I know it was wrong, dangerous, but I was desperate." Jennifer sat beside Eleanor and took her hands in hers. "What matters is that Thunder is safe, and now we understand what happened." "Thunder?" Richard raised an eyebrow. A small smile appeared on Eleanor's face. "That's what I called him in the 2 days he was with me. Strong as thunder, despite being so small." Richard felt a pang of guilt for having renamed the dog. "We called him Hope," he admitted, "because that's what he represented for you, your last hope." Eleanor nodded, moved. "That's a beautiful name, too." "Mrs. Williams, who's taking care of him now?" Jennifer asked kindly. The elderly woman sighed deeply. "No one. They don't allow pets here. That's why I sent him to Margaret. She was my only family. Now that she's gone, I have no one left." The words from the note echoed in Richard's mind. "I have no one left in the world." It wasn't just a dramatic line, it was the plain truth. "We'd like to bring Thunder, or Hope, to visit you," Jennifer said impulsively. Maybe we can talk to the administration, explain the situation. Eleanor's eyes shone in a way they hadn't in years. Would that be possible? To see him one more time? We'll try, Richard promised firmly. In the meantime, you have our word that he'll be well taken care of. The conversation continued for a while longer. Eleanor spoke about her life, how she'd worked as an elementary school teacher for nearly 40 years before retiring, about the fight with her sister over their parents' now abandoned house, about the loneliness of recent years. When they said goodbye, promising to return soon with the puppy, Eleanor seemed transformed. There was color in her cheeks and a new light in her eyes. Richard realized that besides saving a dog's life, they were now restoring hope to an elderly, a woman who had lost everything. On the way back to the car, Jennifer held Richard's arm. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "Most people would have just ignored a moving box, or at most called the police and left the problem for others to solve." "It was the right thing to do," he replied, feeling strangely light despite the complicated situation. When they reached the car, Hope, or Thunder, greeted them enthusiastically, as if sensing something important had happened. Richard picked up the puppy, looking into its eyes. "Well, it seems you've got a brand new original name, little buddy. And we managed to find out who sent you. What do we do now?" Jennifer asked, getting into the car. "We can't just leave her there all alone." Richard thought for a moment before answering. "Did you hear what she said about her parents' house, the one that caused the fight between the sisters? Let's see if we can find it. Maybe it's the key to understanding this whole story." With the help of GPS and a few more details from the staff at the Senior Living Center, they soon stood before an old house in a traditional neighborhood of Rochester. Unlike the house where Eleanor had lived before, this one was larger, with architectural details that revealed its age, likely from the 1940s or 1950s. The house also looked abandoned, but on a different scale. It was clear it had once been an impressive residence in its heyday, with careful architectural details and a garden that, though neglected, still showed signs of an elaborate landscaping plan. "It's amazing how family fights can destroy so much," Jennifer remarked, observing the house through the closed gate. "Two sisters who stopped speaking over a property that ended up abandoned." "Life is full of these ironies," Richard agreed. As they studied the house, an elderly man approached, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. "Looking for someone?" he asked, his voice hoarse but strong. "We're just learning about the Williams family's history," Richard replied, deciding to be direct. "We just visited Mrs. Eleanor at the senior home." The man's face lit up with a nostalgic smile. "Eleanor, how is she?" "It's been years since I last saw her, since she moved to the other neighborhood." "You know her well?" Jennifer asked. "I'm Harold, the Williams family's neighbor for over 50 years, he introduced himself. "I knew Dr. Williams and his wife. I knew the girls when they still ran around this garden. Such a shame what happened afterward." "What exactly happened?" Richard asked, sensing they were about to uncover another piece of the puzzle. Harold steadied himself on his cane, preparing to tell a story that had clearly been significant in his life. Dr. Williams was a respected doctor here in town, his wife a homemaker. They had two daughters, Margaret, the eldest, and Eleanor, 7 years younger. When the doctor passed, he left this house to both of them, on the condition that they never sell it, that they keep the family's legacy intact. Jennifer and Richard listened intently as the man continued. Margaret wanted to sell the house and split the money. She'd married a businessman from New York City and wanted to use her share to invest in her husband's ventures. Eleanor refused, honoring her father's wish. The fight was ugly. Margaret ended up moving to New York City, cutting ties with her sister. Eleanor stayed here for a while, but the house was too big for one person, and the memories were painful. She eventually rented a smaller place and left this house locked up. "And the house stayed like this, abandoned all these years?" Richard asked, incredulous. "Exactly. Neither of them could sell without the other's consent, so it's been in limbo. Every now and then, Eleanor would come here, tend to the garden a bit, check if everything was all right. But in recent years, not even that." Richard couldn't help but notice the tragic irony. A house that could have sheltered a family remained empty for decades because of a misunderstanding. And now, with Margaret gone and Eleanor in a nursing home, What would become of that property? "Mr. Harold, do you think this house is still livable?" asked Jennifer, an idea beginning to form in her mind. The elderly man shrugged. "With a good renovation, why not? The structure is solid. It was built to last. It would need a thorough cleaning, maybe rewiring, plumbing, but nothing impossible." Jennifer and Richard exchanged meaningful glances. "Thank you for the story, Mr. Harold," Richard said. "It was very enlightening." Back in the car with Hope Thunder sleeping peacefully in the back seat, Richard looked at Jennifer. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" She smiled, nodding. "That maybe we've found not just a solution for Eleanor, but also for Thunder. And maybe for us too," he added, surprising himself with the words that left his mouth. Jennifer blushed slightly, turning her gaze to the abandoned house. "Let's not rush. We have a lot of work ahead." And so on that sunny afternoon in Rochester, a bold plan was born, one that would forever change the lives of a former postal worker, a dedicated veterinarian, a lonely elderly woman, and a puppy who had traveled in a box. Back in New York City, Richard and Jennifer spent the following days working out their plan. The idea was ambitious: to renovate the old Williams house and create a space where Eleanor could spend her final years with dignity alongside Thunder, Hope, and other rescued animals. The first step was understanding the legal status of the property. With Margaret's passing, her share of the inheritance should have gone to her direct heirs. If she had no children, it was most likely that Eleanor was the only living heir. Richard scheduled a meeting with William Parker, the realtor handling the sale of Margaret's house on the Upper East Side. "So here's the situation," Richard concluded after explaining everything. "We need to know who Margaret's legal heirs are and if there's any chance Eleanor could take ownership of her parents' house." William stroked his chin, thoughtful. "From what I know, Margaret had no children, and in the will we registered, she left most of her estate to charities." He hesitated for a moment. "But there's an interesting clause that might be relevant to you. She specifically mentioned that her share in her parents' house in Rochester should go back to Eleanor if she was still alive." Richard and Jennifer looked at each other, surprised. "That means that despite the distance, Margaret honored her father's wish in the end." William finished. "The house now belongs entirely to Eleanor. We just need to formalize the transfer, which might take some time, given the bureaucracy involved." It was as if a huge weight had lifted from Richard's shoulders. The hardest part of the plan, the legal ownership issue, had a simpler solution than they'd imagined. "How long do you think the transfer would take?" Jennifer asked. "With all the paperwork in order, 2 to 3 months. But you'd need Eleanor's explicit authorization to start the process." "That won't be a problem," Richard assured. "We'll visit her again tomorrow." The next challenge was assessing the actual condition of the house and estimating renovation costs. For that, they'd need professional help. Jennifer suggested contacting an architect friend who worked on social projects and had experience with low-cost renovations. As the plans progressed, Thunder Hope adapted perfectly to life in Richard's apartment. Defying all expectations of the former mail carrier, the building superintendent not only authorized the animal's temporary presence, but was also charmed by the story, offering help with whatever was needed. "I never imagined I'd end up with a dog," Richard commented to Jennifer during an impromptu dinner at his apartment after a long day researching construction materials. "And I never imagined I'd be helping renovate a house in Rochester. For a woman I barely knew 2 weeks ago," she replied with a smile. "Life is full of surprises, isn't it?" Richard watched Jennifer playing with Thunder on the living room rug. In just over a week, this determined woman had swept into his life like a hurricane, changing everything. Just like the little dog now happily chewing on a toy. The next day, they returned to Rochester to visit Eleanor and present their plan. They brought Thunder with them after securing special permission from the Senior Living Center for the animal's visit. The reunion between Eleanor and the puppy was emotional. The elderly woman cried as she held the little dog in her arms, repeatedly thanking Richard and Jennifer for saving his life. "We have a proposal for you," Richard said after, explaining the legal situation with her parents' house. They detailed the plan, using the Williams house to create not just a home for Eleanor and Thunder, but also a small shelter for rescued animals that Jennifer would help manage. Richard, with his logistics knowledge from his years as a mail carrier, would handle the operational side. "You'd do this for me?" Eleanor asked, incredulous. "You barely know me." "Sometimes life puts us on unexpected paths for a reason," Jennifer replied, holding the older woman's hand. "Thunder brought us together for a purpose. Maybe it's time to turn this whole story into something positive." Eleanor looked long at the veterinarian and then at Richard. "The house needs a lot of work. I can't afford it." "We've thought of that," Richard assured her. "I have some savings set aside for my daughter's college, but she recently got a full scholarship. Jennifer has connections with NGOs that can help, and I can do a lot of the manual work myself. Plus," Jennifer added, "once the shelter is running, we can seek sponsorships and donations. It'll be a sustainable, long-term project." Eleanor's eyes shone with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Why are you doing all this?" Richard thought before answering. "Why really? What would drive a middle-aged man who'd just lost his 15-year job to embark on such an adventure with a stranger?" "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he finally replied. "You, Thunder, me, all of us." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something profound. "My parents' house was always meant to be a home, not a source of conflict. If you can turn it into a place of hope and warmth, nothing would make me happier." And so, with Eleanor's consent, the Hope House project officially began. In the following months, Richard's life changed completely. From a man of rigid, hand-lonely routines, he became the center of a network of people dedicated to a common goal. The house renovations progressed at an astonishing pace. Jennifer's architect friend, Michael, designed a plan that respected the original architecture while adapting the spaces for new needs. The ground floor would be divided between living quarters for Eleanor and a space for rescued animals. The upper floor, which needed more repairs, would be renovated in a second phase to accommodate a resident veterinarian and volunteers. Richard discovered an unexpected talent for carpentry, crafting much of the furniture and animal fixtures from recycled materials. His apartment in Astoria had become a meeting point for volunteers who showed up in growing numbers, drawn by the story. That was beginning to spread. Jennifer, with her network of contacts in the veterinary world, secured donations of equipment and medications. She also negotiated partnerships with clinics in the Rochester area for specialized care when needed. The relationship between the two also evolved, though neither mentioned explicitly what was happening. They worked together like a perfect team, complementing each other naturally. Jennifer brought technical knowledge and connections. Richard contributed with his determination and practical skills. Thunder, Hope, now grown and full of energy, was the project's mascot, winning over everyone who heard his story. Emily, Richard's daughter, initially skeptical about her father's crazy idea, ended up getting involved too, using her medical knowledge to help adapt the house to an elderly woman's specific needs. Weekends, once lonely for Richard, were now filled with trips to Rochester, where father and daughter worked side by side on renovations. "I've never seen you so happy, Dad," Emily remarked one afternoon as they painted the porch together. "It's like you found a new purpose." Richard smiled, thinking about how his life had changed since the day he found a box moving in his van. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find the right path," he replied, watching Jennifer in the distance measuring the space where the kennels would be installed. 3 months after the project began, the residential part of the house was practically ready. With the legal paperwork finally settled, it was time for Eleanor to see her new home. The move was an emotional event. Several volunteers showed up to help, turning what could have been a tiring day into a true celebration. Eleanor, who in recent months had regained not only her physical health, but also her joy for life, couldn't hold back tears as she entered, her childhood home now transformed. "It's exactly as I remember, yet completely different," she said, as Richard guided her through the house tour. The old furniture that could be salvaged had been restored and integrated into the decor, preserving family memories. Old photos Eleanor had kept in a box all these decades were framed and hung on the walls, telling the Williams family's story. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps. That's a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. "This room was Mum and Dad's," she said emotionally, stepping into what would now be her bedroom. They'd be so happy to see the house like this, full of life again. Thunder, who already recognized Eleanor perfectly, never left her side, as if understanding this woman was special. The bond between them was visible and touching. "He'll be a great companion for you," Jennifer remarked, watching the dog lie at Eleanor's feet as she sat in the porch rocking chair. "He already is," the elderly woman replied with a serene smile. "I never imagined at 82 I'd start a new life. You've given me more than a home. You've given me a reason to keep going." That night, after the housewarming party, when all the volunteers had left and Eleanor slept in her new room with Thunder beside the bed, Richard and Jennifer stayed on the porch, gazing at the stars in Rochester's clear sky. "We did it," he said, still amazed by everything they'd accomplished in such a short time. "This is just the first phase," Jennifer reminded him, ever practical. "We still have a lot of work ahead with the shelter section. Have you thought about what you'll do next? Will you keep living in New York City and just come here on weekends?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Jennifer turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I'm thinking about moving here permanently. The clinic where I work in New York is going through financial difficulties, and I've received an offer from a clinic here in Rochester." She hesitated before continuing. "What about you? Have you decided what you'll do?" Richard had spent the last few months so focused on the project that he'd barely thought about his professional future. The small settlement he'd received from the U.S. Postal Service was running out, and he'd need to find a stable income soon. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "I don't see myself going back to an office job, following strict orders and schedules again. This project showed me I'm capable of so much more." "You have a talent for project management," Jennifer observed. "The way you organized everything, coordinated the volunteers, negotiated with suppliers, you could make a career out of it." Richard had never considered that before. His whole life, he'd just been a task executor, following rules and protocols set by others. "You really think so?" Jennifer smiled, lightly touching his arm. "I'm certain. And I also know that whatever path you choose, you'll succeed. You have that rare quality many people lack, genuine determination." They fell silent for a moment, both aware they were at a crossroads. The project that had brought them together was entering a new phase and decisions had to be made. "You know what's funny?" Richard finally said. "If I hadn't found that box moving that day, we never would have met. We wouldn't be here now." "Fate works in mysterious ways," Jennifer replied, gazing at the stars. "Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages." Richard laughed at the unintentional pun. Literally, in this case. Their eyes met, and in that moment, without words, they both knew what was between them went far beyond their partnership in the project. It was something deeper, more meaningful, something that, like Hope House, was just beginning to bloom. 6 months after Eleanor moved to Hope House, the project was in full swing. The upper floor had been renovated, creating space for more rescued animals and the volunteers who now took shifts to provide 24-hour care. Jennifer had moved permanently to Rochester, accepting a position at the local veterinary clinic. 3 times a week, she provided free care at Hope House, benefiting not only the shelter animals but also pets from low-income families in the area. Richard, surprising everyone, especially himself, found his professional calling as a logistics consultant for social projects. His experience at the U.S. Postal Service, combined with what he'd learned developing Hope House, perfectly qualified him to help other similar initiatives get organized. He worked mostly remotely, splitting his time between New York City and Rochester. Eleanor thrived in her new role. From a fragile, lonely woman at the Senior Living Center, she became the matriarch of Hope House, sharing stories with volunteers, helping where she could, and above all, filling the place with her wisdom and warmth. Thunder, now a well-trained adult dog, became not only Eleanor's inseparable companion, but also a natural therapist for the frightened new arrivals at the shelter. His story, shared on the project's social media, inspired donations and brought visibility to the cause. On a particularly pleasant autumn afternoon, Richard arrived in Rochester after a week in New York City. He found Eleanor and Jennifer on the porch, sipping tea while watching a group of young volunteers playing with the dogs in the garden. "How were the meetings in New York City?" Jennifer asked, smiling as she saw him. "Productive," he replied, sitting beside them. "The Happy Paws Foundation approved our proposal. We'll receive funding to expand the project to 2 more cities in the region." "That's wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. "Imagine how many more we can help." Richard smiled, observing the transformation in the elderly woman. It was hard to believe this energetic and enthusiastic woman was the same frail lady they'd met at the nursing home a year ago. "And how was your week here?" he asked, accepting the cup of tea Jennifer offered. "Busy," Jennifer replied. "We took in 5 more dogs and 3 cats from an abuse situation. They're still in isolation, receiving treatment, but they'll recover. And we had 3 successful adoptions." "And I made a new friend?" Eleanor added with youthful enthusiasm. "Doris, my old neighbor, started joining our knitting afternoons with the animals. It's been so good for her. She's been so lonely since her husband passed." Richard smiled, feeling that familiar sense of fulfillment that had grown over the last few months. What had started as an impulsive act of kindness for an abandoned animal had turned into a project benefiting dozens of people and animals. After tea, while Jennifer tended to an emergency with one of the new rescues, Richard and Eleanor walked slowly through the garden, with Thunder faithfully by their side. "You know, Richard," Eleanor began, stopping to watch a hummingbird among the flowers she'd planted herself, "I spent most of my adult life regretting not getting married, not having children. I thought I'd die alone, leaving nothing of value behind." She paused, breathing in the fragrant garden air before continuing. "But now I see life had other plans for me. Maybe my purpose was always this, to create a space of love and healing, even if it came late in life." Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. He too had spent years feeling trapped in a life that never quite felt like his own, following a predetermined path without question. "Life is funny," he remarked. "Sometimes we need a big shake-up to find our true direction." Eleanor smiled, her wise eyes watching the former postal worker with maternal fondness. "Speaking of direction, you and Jennifer need to stop pretending you're just project partners. The love between you is obvious even to an old woman like me." Richard felt his face flush like a teenager caught red-handed. "It's complicated," he murmured. "Our lives are in transition. The project takes so much time and energy." "Life's too short to wait for the perfect moment, my dear," Eleanor interrupted with the frankness only age allows. "Take it from someone who's missed too many chances waiting for moments that never came." That evening, after the communal dinner that had become a Friday tradition at Hope House, Richard invited Jennifer for a walk. The night was clear, with a starry sky, typical of the countryside. "I've been thinking a lot," he began as they walked side by side along the stone path they'd built together in the garden. "About what?" Jennifer asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. "About us. About the future. About what we want to build together, beyond Hope House." Jennifer stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "I've been thinking too," she admitted. "A lot." "And what have you decided?" Richard asked, his heart racing. "That's some of the best things in life happen when we least expect them. Like a dedicated mailman who gets startled by a moving box and calls the police." She smiled, her eyes shining under the moonlight. "But instead, he decides to follow his heart and change the course of many lives, including mine." Richard felt a deep emotion hearing those words. In a year, his life had taken a complete turn. From a lonely man following strict rules and protocols, he had become someone now carving his own path, building something meaningful and lasting. "I love you, Jennifer," he said simply, the words flowing naturally as if they had always been there waiting for the right moment. "I love you too, Richard," she replied, her smile lighting up the night. "And I think it's time we admit what we're building goes far beyond a social project." When they kissed for the first time under the starry sky of Rochester, Richard felt as if the circle had finally closed. The mysterious box in his van hadn't just brought a frightened dog, it had also brought a new life, a new chance, a new love. On the porch of the house, discreetly watching the couple, Eleanor smiled with satisfaction. Beside her, Thunder rested peacefully, his mission complete. In a way, The puppy who had traveled in a box through the US Postal Service had delivered far more than anyone could have imagined. Not just letters or packages, but second chances, new beginnings, and above all, hope. And so what began with a frightened mailman calling the police after seeing a moving box in his van turned into a story of redemption, love, and purpose, proving that sometimes the most important packages we receive in life are the ones we never expected. The end. Dear listeners, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your words in the comments are the fuel that keeps us telling these stories of resilience and hope. What would you have done in Richard's place? Your opinion means so much to us.